Once again on Stories That Change Lives, the Yes Effect. Luis Bush, how are you? Great, thank you, Agustin. Today we're going to see the life of a man from the Philippines named Rainier Chu. Reading his story in the book Something That Grabs My Attention, very interesting. He has a university degree and he has a calling, the Yes Effect, to help the poor. But he gives an amazing declaration that I found remarkable. To help the poor, you have to live with the poor, eat with the poor, and even get sick like the poor get sick. And I think this is an incredible statement because it's what he did. Talk to us about this man, Rainier Chu, from Manila in the Philippines. What's his story? Yes, he's a lawyer, and starting out, his parents live in a place in Manila with a good financial situation at home. But as a child, he gets bored a little, and he starts roaming the streets, and he ends up in the poorest places there in Manila. And he spends a lot of time there, running around, getting to know the place during his childhood, mostly between 10 to 20 years old, when he was all over that area. But he started seeing the reality there, and that started to draw him. And that calling that he felt moved him to study law, to help the poor in a very practical way. He's a tax lawyer. That's what he studied. I don't know if his parents allowed him to do that. In my personal case, it was similar in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I was running around as a child also, and my parents were watching me. In this case, they allowed him to do it, and he keeps doing it. And as he did it more and more, the conviction came to help these people. He's a tax lawyer and expert in that area, coming from a high class, from a family with a good financial situation. He gets married, and his wife tells him, "I love your vision, I love your calling, but I'm not there." And there's also this situation with the wife. In almost every case, there's a situation with the wife. How did they get through that process? Well, she lived in poverty. She came from that background. She studied medicine. So she wanted to live outside of poverty in reality. So when she met Rainier, it was a tension point for her, very real between them. But after a certain point, that she starts seeing Rainier's realization of working that way. She wants to collaborate, even if she doesn't totally agree. But she gets to the point that she wants to share that life with him and collaborate. And she starts helping a little bit, and she has some changes, but she really still prefers the other way. I know a lot of people who are sensitive to the social world, to work with vulnerable people, with the world of poverty, with handicapped. And I'd like for you to develop the concept behind Rainier's declaration when he says, if you want to work helping the poor, you have to live with the poor, eat with the poor, and even learn how to get sick like the poor. It's a powerful statement because it implies, again, a word that we've talked about in other programs, surrender. Surrender. That word appears in the Yes Effect all the time. So tell me, because for every person that wants to help the social world, the vulnerable world, what do you think about that phrase? Well, I would say there are two important points about that phrase. First is how it summarizes the commitment that he's talking about. He uses another word to sum it up, immersion. And that word immersion means that I'll immerse in that cultural reality. Yes, it would be like to embody that reality. Yes, embody. The word immersion doesn't exist in Spanish, does it? Yes, it exists. It's to dive in or embody, to put yourself in the place of another. Sure, the embodiment or immersion. The second important aspect with Rainier and his motivation was the fact that he's a very committed Christian, and he wants to know what Jesus Christ did. He came from glory to the earth. He had to surrender a lot and come to walk among the poor. So his commitment is to follow Jesus Christ's footprints. And because he came to the poor, he followed those footsteps. But what happened to him? Because he comes from a high social class. He has a university degree, so he's able to come and go, be there for a time and leave. It's another thing to say, I'm staying. So how was that process? It was a process of committing himself intellectually, spiritually, and practically. First, he had to come to that in his own mind and his way of thinking, and then in the spiritual way, and he reflects about Christ, and then practically in his own vocation. So he starts a process of studying how to serve among the poorest of the poor. Because it isn't just poor people, it's the poorest of the poor. And we've been there. I've seen the extreme poverty in that same dump in Manila, where the waste of the whole city goes. And it's constantly burning because of the trash. So I went and I walked with someone who has that same calling called Andres, and I saw it personally. I had to use high boots, and I remember one day that a young woman came crying to Andres and I as we were walking, help me, help me. And what's going on, Andres said, and she says, I have my baby in this bag. He died this morning, and I don't have the money to give him a dignified end. Did Rainier stay there finally? Rainier stayed there. The wife resisted, like you were saying, resisted for a long time. But she had to decide, do I want to live with my husband and his conviction, or do I want to follow a different direction for my own life? And she chooses to stay with her husband, even when she didn't feel the same conviction. What happened is that after a little while, she found a great opportunity for her profession as a medical doctor, because there's a lot of sickness. And second, even when today there are difficult things for her in that reality, she's chosen to live and experience that life together with her husband. And there are some changes coming to her life in the process. Do you share the idea that to work with the poor and with extreme poverty, you must live a long time with them? Or is it kind of relative, that you can also help going in and out? Because for some, the majority, they help by going in and out, but they continue living in their own lifestyles. Do you believe in order to have a genuine transformational process, to really make sense of the book titled The Yes Effect, what he means when he says, if you really have a vocation, a calling, a yes effect, let's be clear, then you must live, eat, and get sick with the poor. Everything else is a handout. It's noble, but it's only that. It's not the yes effect. What do you think? I would say yes. Yes to what? That I agree with what you said. I mean, you have to live with it. The word is immersion. You have to be immersed in it, just like Rainier did. In other words, you have to be immersed in that, just like Rainier, and look at him finally accompanying in that lifestyle. So what they're doing is training others by asking that same question: do you want to come with temporary help, or do you want to really see a cultural difference, a change? In some cases, raising up a culture so that there's a change, like in the case of Cairo. This place has changed completely. The homes have changed, the education, infrastructure has grown, has increased a lot, and everything has changed really there in Cairo, in Garbage City, and Makadam. If you go today, it's a different world, and then after a time in Manila's dump, where 3 of our children have been, the 3 youngest, they stayed there, lived there for 4 months, experiencing that reality. It's changing. Manila is changing. The place is changing. The culture of the place is changing. So we see the impact of a person like Rainier with enough time and with his wife, who's hesitant but continues with him, supporting him, and seeing the place really changing. His testimony establishes the following. Basically, if you want to make a relevant change in the place where you want the transformation, where you want to have an impact and a structural change, you must establish yourself in that place to produce the change. It's impossible to just go in and out. Why did you say in the book that living with the poor is infectious, using that word? There are many that now are following those footprints. Viv Gregg, a great friend of ours from New Zealand, is the one who called Rainier to that place. And Viv and his Brazilian wife lived in maybe the most challenging city in the world, Calcutta. They're in India. And they and he have really been champions for this preparation for immersion. And he now has many cases like Rainier. And the result is also forming churches. In the case of Rainier, they've planted 7 different churches related to his process. In that place, in the places of poverty, or because of the testimony, in other places that are not that poor. No, in poor places, there are 7 churches that have already come up in that poverty in relation to where Rainier is. So it's part of their mission too, starting churches among the poor, in poverty. And with the Word of God growing in the convictions and doctrine of the Word of the Lord, many times around the world we've seen a culture arise as a result of the fruit of learning the Word of God when it's taught, believed, and lived. First in relationships between people within the church, in the culture, inside of the Christian community, and then going out of their own Christian culture, in their own neighborhoods, with their neighbors, their lives are changing. In that specific case, there are now 7 churches in not a very big place. They've already started having, as a body of Christ, a cultural change. And in the Philippines, they've seen the Christian church grow in the last 20 years. It's amazing. Like in China, too. And how in China, like the case we spoke about just now, there's a cultural change in the nation. And in the case of the Philippines, it's already happening there, too. In every country, everywhere, there's always a poor neighborhood. There are no countries that have no poor neighborhoods, except honorable exceptions. And the church, and many that work in the church world, they have the challenge of working for these people. Considering that parameter, that testimony or reference, it looks truly impossible if you really want to work with the poor, not to experience the same path that Rainier and his wife have walked. This is what I understand from all your argument. Even if his wife didn't agree with him, he makes sure that she'll come along, because if not, that project will fail, right? Correct, that's how it is. In this case, it was a change that they saw in Mila after a while. They're still married. We were in contact with the couple 2 weeks ago. And we said, we're going to have a few interviews and talk about you. What's your news? How are you as a couple? And despite her hesitancy for such a long time, she's now serving as a doctor and accompanying her husband. And she's living it. She's seeing the blessings of God that are arising as a result of working together and staying together in this ministry. What has this story meant in the life of the Philippines as a nation? As a nation, I think it's an encouragement in the first place. We also know a person very well who's very prepared. She's married to the president of a training organization. She's communicating these results to the nation. In other words, the testimony of what's happened. And I think it's not just a good example, but the fruit of what's going on has mobilized others. It's putting down a path to follow. It's a way, a place to start if it doesn't exist in their community already. So I think it's having a national impact. And what's happening is that Christians are emerging in leadership within the culture. And there's recognition on a global scale, not just nationally. So much so that there's a global evangelical church, an association that's in front of this, recognized by others for the same model of the Philippines that's been managed for many years. It's an example of how this can happen in a country. So this is a case logistically limited to a certain place, but it's had a national impact. Seeing the story of this couple with other stories that are in the book, The Yes Effect, there's always a fight with comfort. This is a very interesting case because there's a case that deals with social classes, with economic conditions. It teaches us a lesson, and I'd like for you to communicate to us the concept of how people that are struggling with shaking off social class, economic comfort, and they know that on the other side there's a whole process in which they feel a calling to do very powerful social work. But they struggle with that, and that fight can last for years, and in the end they don't do it. How can that be broken? I think in just one way. There are exceptional cases that have done it without this, but my advice is that the only one who can do this really in us is Christ. That's the only hope for this to happen. Because without Christ, with all our thoughts, our values, our principles, who we are, we really don't have the motivation nor the incentive. But when Christ comes to live in us, there's hope that what He wants to do in this world is bring spiritual blessings and raise people up from where they are to places of blessing. Rainier's wife, she was a Christian, but she still hesitated. Everyone has their own individual journey. Of course, but in the end, he does something strategically, and she makes the decision to adhere to that. What was the key for her? Well, if you read the book, I think you can answer that question, right? No. I read most of the book, a summary of the book, but it's interesting because I don't think that struggle is only between Rainier and his wife. Many marriages are going through that. She wants to do social work, he wants to be a lawyer, but says, this isn't for me, or I'm working in a big company and God's calling me to do social work. So how does that work? We never get to the point that everything is perfect and everyone totally agrees. Even with the two of them, she still resists a little bit, right? But she's decided to continue with him, and I think that everyone, with our criteria, our lives, we have to get to a point of conviction. And that conviction has to depend on the criteria on which we base the results of the commitment of our lives. And for us, we lived that way in Brazil. And then the Lord took us to many other places in the world, in the middle of situations of deep need. So everyone has their own way and judgment on that path. You have to get to certain convictions. And I think there's no paradise on earth except in the person of Jesus Christ. And it's there that we find the full satisfaction that we are in a place that we can be used according to His will. And it's not the same for everyone. I mean, God is not calling everyone to the needy places of the world. It's the personal calling that we have, the level at which we follow the pattern of the word of the Lord in a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Because Jesus Christ in us is going to lead us in the steps to follow in our personal lives, in our marriage, with our children, and also with the things we do in our lives. Even the calling, like in Rainier's case, to places of deep poverty. Maybe you have a solution that can help us to answer your own question. So let's change the dynamic a little at the end of this section. And I'll ask you, as a host, what's the answer to your own question? The last one you asked me. I agree that there has to be something supernatural to make a decision like that, because the nature of man prevents him from embracing a vision that doesn't line up to the lifestyle he has. So something supernatural has to happen to make that decision. Because of this supernatural world, I'll have to leave my comfort zone. I'll have to leave my own story of sacrifice, of persistence, above all of compassion, because to work in the world of poverty, you need a lot of compassion. And it has to be something supernatural because it has to break my emotions, it has to break my way of thinking, it has to touch my spouse. Many supernatural things that have to happen that take root finally in the word you said, in conviction. The conviction that this is the purpose of what God is calling us to do. The yes effect. So without a supernatural work, it would be almost humanly impossible. And I think it would be a failure, because if it's just based on emotions, it will not persevere. Stories that transform lives. Here we see once again that it implies surrender, it implies leaving behind comfort, it implies sensitivity, compassion, conviction. The yes effect. Stories that transform lives.